My husband, Lester, once told me that I was the glue that held our blended family together. But last week, I discovered that glue had become toxic. After being publicly humiliated and uninvited from my stepson's wedding, I found out my husband knew it was coming. He watched the train wreck happen in slow motion. He chose silence, and that silence would cost him everything. This is a story about how deep betrayal can hide in plain sight. If you've ever felt unseen or disrespected, you know what's coming. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss how this unfolds. The specific aroma of a well-seared ribeye steak, rich with notes of butter and thyme, has always been the scent of my life hitting a perfect note. For 20 years, that smell was the prelude to contentment. It meant our long, oak dining table would be full, that the rafters of our suburban Columbus home would ring with laughter, and that for a little while, the chaotic world outside would cease to exist. On this crisp September evening, the occasion of my husband Lester's 50th birthday, that symphony was at its crescendo. The house felt alive, every corner humming with the energy of the 5 children who were the architecture of my world. From my end of the table, I had a perfect view of my universe. Charlie, our 20-year-old, was home from Ohio State for the weekend, his face alight as he described a disastrous chemistry lab experiment. His story had David, 17 and all lanky teenage energy, clutching his sides with laughter. Beside him, my sweet Ellie, my 13-year-old baby, was studiously creating a fortress wall out of her garlic mashed potatoes, a concentrated little habit that had survived from toddlerhood. And across from them, my stepsons, though the word step had always felt hollow and ill-fitting, were right in the thick of it. Ben, at 26, was chuckling quietly, while his older brother Adam, 28, was beaming, his arm resting possessively on the back of his fiancée Alice's chair. Looking at Adam, with his easy smile so much like his father's, my mind drifted. A vivid memory, sharp as a photograph, surfaced. I saw a 5-year-old boy with enormous, frightened brown eyes, his hand clutching Lester's lap, standing hesitantly in the doorway of my tiny, pre-marriage apartment. He and 3-year-old Ben were a package deal, and I'd fallen for all 3 of them at once. I remembered a summer afternoon a few months later, the smell of hot asphalt rising from the street, and the jarring scrape of metal on concrete. Adam had taken a nasty fall from his first 2-wheeler, his small face, streaked with dirt and tears, looked utterly broken. Lester was on a business call, so I was the one who ran out. I was the one who knelt on the pavement, murmuring soothing words as I cleaned the bloody gravel from his knee. I was the one who applied the superhero Band-Aid and declared him the bravest knight in all of Ohio. Through the years, that role had been my constant. Lester, for all his goodness and love, was chained to a demanding career that often kept him late. He was the provider, but I was the constant presence. The fevers in the dead of night, the frantic searches for lost science projects, the hundreds of soccer games and band recitals cheered from the sidelines. I was there. I was the keeper of their histories, the witness to their growth. A little while earlier, as I was putting the finishing touches on the birthday cake, I'd caught Lester being uncharacteristically secretive with his phone in the corner of the living room. He'd swiped the screen off quickly when he saw me approach. Just some stupid sports highlights. "Honey," he'd said with a dismissive wave. I'd thought nothing of it then. Just another moment in the comfortable rhythm of our lives. Lester caught my gaze now from his seat at the head of the table. His eyes, still a warm, comforting shade of blue after all these years, crinkled at the corners. He lifted his wine glass an inch off the table in a silent toast just for me. It was a familiar gesture, a thread in the tapestry of our marriage. It reminded me of something he'd said to our friends just last week. His voice thick with sincerity after a second glass of wine. Christina is the heart of this family. I'm just the bones. None of this works without her. Surrounded by the tangible proof of our shared life. The warmth of the food. The love of our children. I felt that sentiment settle deep within me. It felt true. It felt permanent. So, Ellie's bright voice cut through my thoughts, pulling me back to the present. Her eyes, the same shade of blue as her father's, were practically dancing. Mom. About the wedding, I saw the most amazing dress online. It's lavender and has all this sparkly stuff on it. We're still going to Easton Town Center in a few weeks to find one. Right, for me and for you. The wedding Adam and Alice's was the sun our family was orbiting this summer. The excitement was a constant, pleasant hum in the background of our lives. Everyone had a part to play. A costume to wear. I wouldn't miss it for the world. Sweetie, I assured her, my heart swelling. We'll make a whole girls' day of it. We'll find you the sparkliest dress in the whole city. And then we'll find something elegant for the mother of the groom's wife. I laughed at my own clumsy title. That's when the music stopped. Not the actual music from the speaker in the corner, but the music of the evening. It happened in an instant. A strange, tense energy shot across the table, emanating from Alice. Her polite smile tightened at the corners. A barely perceptible shift. She set her wine glass down on the table with a soft, deliberate click. And her eyes darted to Adam. A silent, urgent message passing between them. He shifted uncomfortably, his own smile faltering. Alice cleared her throat. The small sound seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Oh, she began, her voice a carefully constructed melody of lightness. Well, Christina, we only really need to worry about one dress. Just for Ellie. The words floated in the air for a moment. My brain tried to catch them, to arrange them into a sentence that made sense. Only one dress. Maybe she meant my dress was already taken care of. A surprise, perhaps. My mind scrambled for a logical end. Harmless explanation. But Ellie, in her beautiful, unfiltered innocence, didn't have that filter. She giggled. Why, what are you going to wear? Mom, a power suit. Alice did not giggle back. The mask of polite regret settled firmly on her face as she turned her gaze from Adam back to me. You're not invited, she stated. It wasn't an apology. It was a fact. We decided to keep the guest list extremely limited. We have to. It's just for our immediate family. Just immediate family. The silence that followed was a physical thing. It pressed in on my eardrums. The sounds of the house, previously a warm blanket of noise, became sharp and distinct. The tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, the distant hum of the refrigerator's compressor, the sound of David shifting his weight in his chair. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck. A wave of heat that had nothing to do with the warmth of the room. My hand, resting on the table, had curled into a tight fist, the linen napkin crushed within it. My first instinct, my only instinct, was to look at Lester. I sought out his eyes, needing him to be my anchor, my translator for this moment that felt like a foreign language. But he wasn't looking at me. He was staring down, his focus laser-sharp on the intricate patterns of his steak knife, as if he were a surgeon about to make a critical incision. His face was ashen. A muscle jumped in his jaw. His silence was the loudest sound in the room. It was Charlie who finally detonated the silence. His voice, usually so laid back, was low and dangerous. Hold on. You're telling us this now at Dad's birthday dinner, or was Mom just never on the list to begin with? Alice flinched as if struck. Adam seemed to shrink in his chair. He couldn't meet Charlie's glare. He looked at the tablecloth. At the ceiling. Anywhere but at the faces of his family. She was never on the list. He mumbled. He finally risked a glance. Not at me, but at his half-brothers, a desperate plea for understanding in his eyes. It's because she's not my real mom. If the silence before was a weight, those words were a guillotine. The steak I'd just eaten felt like a stone in my stomach. 20 years of scraped knees, bedtime stories, packed lunches, and late-night talks about girlfriends and heartbreaks, all of it. Vaporized. Are you out of your mind? David's voice cracked with disbelief. He shoved his plate away, the silverware clattering loudly. She's raised you as much as Dad has. If Mom isn't welcome, then I'm not going. Simple as that. Count me out. 2. Charlie added. His arms crossed over his chest, his expression unyielding. Tears were now streaming silently down Ellie's cheeks. Her small voice was thick with hurt. That's the meanest thing I've ever heard. Mom is our mom. We're a family. We're not going if you leave her out. The three of them formed an unbreakable wall, a fortress of loyalty that seemed to stun Adam and Alice into silence. Adam looked trapped, his gaze flitting around the table, searching for an escape route that didn't exist. His eyes finally landed on the one person who hadn't moved. The silent statue at the head of the table. Dad Adam's voice was thin, pleading. What about you? Are you just going to let this happen? The entire table turned to Lester. The weight of 20 years of marriage, of 5 children, of a blended family forged through love and time. All seemed to rest on his answer. He took a slow, deep breath. The seconds stretched, each one a small eternity. He finally lifted his head, his eyes skittering from Adam to me, then to his other children, filled with a helpless, cornered panic. If Christina isn't going, he said, his voice raspy, barely audible over the ticking clock, then I'm not going either. He said the right words, but they felt hollow, rehearsed. It wasn't the roar of a protective husband. It was the whimper of a man capitulating to the will of his children. And then Adam twisted the knife. He turned his face, now a mask of frustration and righteous indignation, directly on me. For the first time since this nightmare began, he met my eyes. And what I saw there, pure, unadulterated blame, knocked the breath from my lungs. Are you really going to let everyone ruin my wedding over this? A sound bubbled up from my chest. It was a laugh. It was a dry, broken, airless sound, completely out of place. It was the sound of a circuit board overloading and frying. The sheer, magnificent, mind-breaking absurdity of being blamed for the pain they had just inflicted was too much for my brain to contain. I felt a strange calm descend over me. The pain was still there, a white-hot core deep inside, but it was now wrapped in a layer of protective ice. I pushed my chair back from the table, the movement measured and silent. Lester, I said, and I was surprised by how steady my voice was. I'll wait for you in the car. I didn't look at anyone else. I turned and walked away from the table, my back straight, my head held high. I walked through the kitchen, past the birthday cake on the counter that I would never serve. I walked out the side door into the cool, dark air of the evening. Each step an act of will. I got into the driver's seat of our SUV. The familiar scent of leather a strange comfort. I turned the key. Not to drive away, but just to feel the quiet hum of the engine, to have something else to listen to besides the screaming in my own head. I locked the doors. Through the large window, the dining room looked like a scene in a snow globe, a beautiful, brightly lit diorama of a happy family, now frozen in chaos. My family. My life. A life that, I was beginning to realize, might have been a complete and utter illusion. And then, finally, safely encased in steel and glass, I leaned my forehead against the cold steering wheel and allowed myself to shatter. I don't know how long I sat there in the humming silence of the car. The rhythmic pulse of the engine, the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. Time had dissolved into a thick, syrupy mess of shock and a pain so sharp it felt physical, like a shard of glass lodged under my ribs. Eventually, the passenger door opened, and Lester slid into the seat beside me. He didn't say anything for a long moment, just stared through the windshield at the dark, manicured lawns of our neighborhood. The silence was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Christina, he finally began, his voice low and strained. I am so sorry. I was stunned. I didn't know what to say. I turned my head slowly, the movement feeling stiff and unnatural. I looked at his face, the face I had woken up next to for 20 years, and felt a chilling sense of detachment, as if I were looking at a stranger. The tears had dried on my cheeks, leaving my skin feeling tight and cold. There was nothing to say. Lester, I replied, my own voice flat and devoid of emotion. They said it all. He reached a hand out to touch my arm, but I flinched. A small, involuntary movement, and his hand dropped back into his lap. The drive home was 5 minutes of the most profound silence I have ever experienced. We walked into our house, the scene of the crime, and the remnants of the ruined birthday dinner were still on the table. A half-eaten steak, overturned water glasses, Ellie's fortress of mashed potatoes, now a sad, collapsed mound. Neither of us had the will to clean it up. We walked past it like soldiers navigating a battlefield after the fighting has stopped. The days that followed were an exercise in cold formality. The house, usually so full of life and noise, was wrapped in a tense, oppressive quiet. We moved around each other like ghosts. Our conversations limited to logistical necessities. Did you take out the trash? Ellie has her orthodontist appointment at 4. We slept on the farthest edges of our king-sized bed. A vast, unspoken canyon between us. The boys, Charlie and David, were fiercely protective of me, their glares following Lester whenever he was in the room. They had stopped speaking to Adam entirely. I was living in a beautiful home that had suddenly become a prison of unspoken resentments. 2 days after the dinner, on a gray and drizzling afternoon, I was folding laundry in the upstairs hallway when I heard Lester's voice coming from his home office. The door was slightly ajar. He was on the phone, his tone low and placating. I understand. Son, I know you didn't mean for it to happen this way. He was saying. I froze, my hand still holding one of David's t-shirts. It was Adam. I couldn't help myself. I stood perfectly still, listening. No. She needs some time, Lester continued. There was a pause. Look, it's a difficult situation for everyone. Alice's feelings are valid. Of course. But, well, it's complicated. Another pause. Longer this time. Let's just all take a breath and let things cool down for a while. We'll figure it out. Okay. Talk soon. Son. I heard the click of the phone ending the call. I stood there, the t-shirt clutched in my fist. A cold dread seeping into my bones. He hadn't defended me. Not once. He hadn't said, "You made a terrible mistake and you need to fix it." He'd called it a difficult situation, as if it were a scheduling conflict or a leaky faucet. He was managing it. He wasn't fixing it. He was trying to smooth the waters, not right a profound wrong. I finished folding the laundry. My movements robotic. The coldness inside me beginning to harden into something that felt dangerously like ice. The breakthrough, if you could call it that, came from Charlie. That evening, he told me he was going to meet Adam. Just to talk. He said. His jaw set. Someone has to. He met his older brother at a neutral, sterile coffee shop downtown. When Charlie came home a couple of hours later, his face was a mixture of anger and a strange, weary pity. He found me in the kitchen, staring blankly into the refrigerator. I know what happened. Mom, he said quietly. He told me everything. It wasn't a simple, cruel decision made by Adam and Alice. It was a slow, creeping poison. Their wedding plans had spiraled, as they often do, becoming bigger and far more expensive than they'd originally intended. Their budget was stretched to the breaking point. And then, like a vulture sensing a kill, Adam's biological mother, Karen, had swooped in. She generously offered to cover a significant portion of the costs. Of course. Her money wasn't a gift, it was a leash. It started with small things. She didn't like the color of the bridesmaids' dresses. She insisted they use her preferred caterer. Each concession Adam and Alice made only emboldened her. And then, she delivered her checkmate move. She would pay for the venue. The most significant expense. On one non-negotiable condition, I was not to be there. Adam told me he tried to argue with her. Charlie recounted, his voice laced with disgust. But she wore him down. He said, "Mom," he said it was just easier to hurt you than it was to stand up to her. Easier to hurt you. The words landed. And for a moment, the ice inside me cracked. I felt a wave of profound sadness. Not just for myself, but for the boy I had raised, the boy who had been so thoroughly broken and manipulated by the woman who gave him life. The next day, Adam and Alice came to the house. They called first. Their voices small and timid over the phone. I agreed to see them. When I opened the door, Adam looked like he hadn't slept in a week. His eyes were red-rimmed and puffy. His shoulders slumped in defeat. Alice stood slightly behind him, unable to meet my gaze. We sat in the living room, the three of us, in a silence that felt as heavy as lead. Christina, Adam finally choked out, his voice thick with tears. I am so sorry. There is no excuse. I was weak. And I was a coward. And I let her do this. I hurt the person who has been more of a mother to me than she ever was. I am so sorry. He broke down then, covering his face with his hands, his body shaking with sobs. Alice spoke softly, her eyes fixed on her hands, which were twisting a tissue into shreds in her lap. My parents are horrified, she whispered. They said this isn't what family does. We were wrong. So wrong. Lester came in then. drawn by the sound of Adam's crying. He took in the scene, his face a mask of paternal concern. He put a hand on Adam's shoulder and then looked at me. It was a performance. And he was the star. He was the wise, forgiving patriarch. "It's okay, son," he said, his voice full of a gentle authority I hadn't heard him use in days. "You made a mistake. But we're a family. We fix things." He looked at Adam and Alice, a magnanimous expression on his face. "Listen to me. You will not take another dime from her. Do you understand? Your mother and I will help you. We will make sure you have the wedding you want, without any strings attached." It was the perfect thing to say. It was supportive, decisive, and generous. Charlie and David, who had come to stand in the doorway, looked relieved. Even I felt a flicker of something, not forgiveness, but a grudging respect. He was finally stepping up. It sounded right. But a tiny, persistent voice in the back of my mind whispered that it felt wrong. It felt too easy. Too clean. A perfect speech delivered to solve an imperfectly messy problem. That night, the feeling of unease lingered. I couldn't sleep. I went downstairs for a glass of water and found Lester on the couch, bathed in the blue glow of the family iPad. He was hunched over, his shoulders tense, rapidly tapping at the screen. He looked so engrossed, so stressed, that he didn't hear me approach. "Everything okay?" I asked softly. He jumped, startled, and fumbled with the device, nearly dropping it. He quickly swiped the screen off. "Yeah, fine," he said, his voice a little too loud. Just some late-night work stuff. You know how it is." He forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes, but I had seen something in the split second before the screen went dark. I'd seen the distinctive bright green bubbles of an SMS text conversation, not the blue of the iMessage he used with work colleagues and the kids. A cold knot tightened in my gut. Karen, I knew, had an Android. She didn't own a single Apple product. The next morning, I called my sister, Sarah. I needed an outside perspective. Someone who wasn't drowning in the emotional swamp of my own house. I relayed the events of the past few days, culminating in Lester's grand, supportive speech. "It just feels off, Sarah," I confessed, pacing my bedroom. "It's like he's reading from a script for the perfect husband, but he hasn't quite learned his lines. It's all a performance. Trust your gut, Chris," she said, her voice firm. "It's never led you wrong before." That afternoon, we got a text from Adam. It was a group message to me. Lester and his siblings. He and Alice had talked all night. They had officially canceled the big wedding venue, losing their deposit but gaining, as he put it, their souls back. They were going to return every last cent to Karen. A wave of relief washed over the house. The immediate crisis was over. The tension seemed to dissipate, replaced by a fragile, tentative of peace. It was later that evening, after Lester had gone to bed, that I saw it. The house was finally quiet. I was tidying up the living room, fluffing pillows, and collecting stray glasses. The iPad was sitting on the coffee table where Lester had left it. On an impulse I still can't explain. Maybe it was my sister's words. Maybe it was the nagging image of those green text bubbles. I picked it up. I pressed the home button, and the screen lit up. He hadn't closed the app. The conversation was still there. My breath caught in my throat. The contact was just a phone number. but I knew whose it was. And the message, sent by my husband weeks before his 50th birthday party, was staring up at me from the screen. A digital snake in my Garden of Eden. It read, "I'll talk to Christina. Just let me handle it. Please don't make a scene." The air rushed out of my lungs. The world narrowed to that single, devastating sentence. He hadn't been surprised. He hadn't been stunned into silence. He had known. He had known all along. My fingers felt numb, the cold glass of the iPad screen leaching the warmth from them. I read the sentence again and again. "I'll talk to Christina. Just let me handle it. Please don't make a scene." The words didn't change. No matter how many times my eyes scanned them, they remained there, glowing in the silent, dark living room. A testament to a betrayal so profound, it felt like it had rewired the last 20 years of my life. He hadn't been stunned. He hadn't been surprised. He had been a co-conspirator in my humiliation. He wasn't the shield I thought he was. He was the gatekeeper who had quietly unlocked the door and let the enemy in, all while assuring me I was safe. His performance at the dinner table, the reluctant declaration that he would stand with me, wasn't an act of loyalty. It was a calculated move to quell a rebellion from his own children. It was damage control. I sank onto the couch, the iPad feeling as heavy as a tombstone in my lap. The man sleeping peacefully upstairs. The man whose snores were a familiar, comforting rhythm in the landscape of my life, was a stranger. And I realized, with a clarity that was both terrifying and liberating, that I had been utterly and completely alone in my marriage for a very long time. I put the iPad back on the coffee table, exactly where I found it, and went upstairs. I slipped into bed, my movements silent and careful, and stared at the ceiling until the first gray hints of dawn began to creep through the blinds. The next few days were a strange, surreal performance. A fragile truce had settled over the house, born from the news that Adam and Alice had canceled the wedding and were returning Karen's money. Lester was acting the part of the relieved, supportive husband, making me coffee in the morning and asking if I was doing okay with a look of practiced concern. I played my part, too. I smiled. I nodded. I said I was fine. But every interaction was filtered through the lens of that glowing green text message. His every kindness felt like a lie. Every touch a violation. I was an actress in a play about my own life, and I was waiting for the final act. The call came 3 days later. It was Adam. His voice was light, happier than I had heard it in months. "Hey, Christina," he said. "I know things have been insane, but Alice and I would love it if we could take the whole family out to dinner tonight, to celebrate a new start, our treat." A part of me wanted to say no, to retreat into the cold, safe numbness I had built around myself. But another part, the part that was still a mother, couldn't refuse the olive branch. So I agreed. That evening, we all gathered at a nice Italian restaurant downtown. It was the kind of place with white tablecloths and waiters who grated fresh Parmesan onto your pasta. It felt jarringly normal. For a little while, listening to David and Charlie bicker good-naturedly about football, watching Ellie meticulously butter her third piece of bread, I could almost forget. I could almost pretend we were the family I thought we were a week ago. After we ordered, Adam cleared his throat and tapped his water glass with a spoon. He was holding Alice's hand, and they were both beaming. "So, we have some news," he announced, his eyes sparkling. "We didn't want to wait. We didn't want any more drama. So, yesterday afternoon, Alice and I went down to the courthouse. We're married." A wave of stunned silence. followed by an eruption of cheers and applause, filled our corner of the restaurant. I felt a genuine smile spread across my face for the first time in days. It was a victory. Love, it seemed, had won out over manipulation. They had taken back their own happiness. And I was so incredibly proud of them. Lester was all smiles and backpats, proposing a toast. The perfect image of the proud father. I watched him over the rim of my champagne glass, and the cold knot in my stomach returned. He was celebrating a victory in a war he had secretly tried to help the other side win. The peace lasted for 72 hours. I was at my office, trying to finalize a quarterly report. When my cell phone rang, it was Ellie. I smiled as I answered. "Hey, sweetie. Done with your homework already?" Mom, her voice was a small, terrified squeak. It was a voice I hadn't heard since she was 4 years old and had woken up from a nightmare. Every maternal alarm in my body went into red alert. "Ellie, what's wrong? Where are you?" "I'm home. I just got off the bus," she whispered, her words punctuated by ragged breaths. "Mom, there's someone at the door. They're banging on it. They're screaming." "Who is it?" "Ellie, can you see who it is?" "I don't know, it's a woman." "Mom, she's screaming your name." And then I heard it. A muffled but unmistakable sound through the phone's speaker, a furious, rhythmic pounding, followed by a high-pitched, hysterical shriek. It was Karen. A primal fear, cold and sharp, shot through me. "Okay, Ellie, listen to me very carefully. Go to my bedroom, lock the door, and hide in the closet. Do it right now. Don't hang up." I could hear her small, panicked footsteps. The click of the bedroom door. The slide of the lock. "I'm in the closet." "Mom," she sobbed. Through the phone, I could hear Karen's voice. A distorted, raging torrent of venom. She was screaming obscenities, calling me every vile name imaginable. And then, she screamed something that made the blood in my veins turn to ice. Something that only a handful of people in the world knew. "You think you can steal my family? You barren witch, you could never even have a real child of your own. You lost them both." She was talking about the miscarriage I'd had years ago. And about the baby. A little boy we'd named Samuel, who was stillborn. A grief so private, so sacred, that I rarely spoke of it. A grief that I had shared, in whispered, tearful confidence, with my husband. "Stay on the phone. Ellie, I'm calling 911 right now. I'm on my way." I fumbled with my desk phone, my fingers shaking so badly I could barely press the numbers. I called 911. Then I called Lester. I threw my things into my bag and ran, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The drive home was a blur of red lights and blaring horns. When I turned onto our street, the scene was even worse than I had imagined. 2 police cruisers were parked at odd angles in front of our house, their lights flashing, painting the serene suburban landscape in frantic strokes of red and blue. A small crowd of neighbors was gathered on their lawns, staring. And there, on our front porch, 2 officers were wrestling with a screaming, thrashing Karen, trying to get her into handcuffs. I slammed the car into park and ran towards the house, pushing past a police officer who tried to stop me. The front door, our beautiful, solid oak door, was horrifically scarred. There were deep gouges in the wood and a large dent near the handle, as if it had been kicked repeatedly. I burst inside and screamed Ellie's name. She came tumbling out of my bedroom, her face pale and streaked with tears, and collapsed into my arms. I held her tight, my body shaking with a mixture of terror and a rage so pure and hot, it felt like it could incinerate the entire world. A few minutes later, Lester pulled up, his face a mask of confusion. He took in the flashing lights, the neighbors, the police on his porch, and a look of deep, weary exasperation crossed his face. I watched him as he spoke to the officers. I watched as he ran a hand through his hair, his posture apologetic. I heard him say the words, his voice carrying on the evening air. "I'm sure this is all just a terrible misunderstanding. She's been going through a very difficult time." He was making excuses for her. He was minimizing it. He was managing the scene. That night, long after the police had taken Karen away and a temporary restraining order had been mentioned, long after our neighbors had retreated back into their homes, the house was quiet again. But it was a violated quiet. The scratches on the door felt like wounds on my own skin. Ellie was asleep. Finally, after I'd promised her 100 times that she was safe, I found Lester in the kitchen, pouring himself a large glass of whiskey. I stood in the doorway and looked at him. She knew. "Lester," I said, my voice dangerously calm. She knew about Samuel. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared into his glass. "She can be vindictive. Christina, you know that." That's not what I asked. I asked how she knew. That is a grief I have shared with exactly 3 people on this planet. My sister, my mother, and you. He took a long swallow of his whiskey, his throat working. He still wouldn't look at me. Maybe I mentioned it a long time ago. I don't remember. It was probably just a slip of the tongue. And that was it. The final lie. The final, pathetic attempt to evade responsibility. The rage that had been simmering inside me for days finally boiled over. But it didn't come out as a scream. It came out as a cold, clear, an absolute certainty. "Your ex-wife showed up at our home and terrorized our daughter," I said, each word a carefully placed stone. "She screamed about the most painful and private loss of my life on our front porch for the entire neighborhood to hear. And your response is that you didn't want to make a scene." He finally looked at me, his eyes full of a pathetic, pleading weakness. What was I supposed to do? Christina confronting her only ever makes it worse. "I don't know, Lester," I said, turning to walk away. "But I'm about to find out." That was the moment the wife died and the investigator was born. The grief and the hurt were still there, but they had been compressed into something hard and sharp, a diamond of pure, cold resolve. I waited until I heard his heavy, whiskey-fueled snores echoing from our bedroom. Then I slipped out of bed, went downstairs, and picked up the iPad. My hands weren't shaking this time. They were perfectly steady. I wasn't just looking for one message anymore. I was looking for the whole story. I scrolled back. Weeks. Months. And then I found it. A motherlode of betrayal. It wasn't just one conversation. It was a long, sordid history of his cowardice. Messages where Karen complained about me, and he responded with placating emojis. Messages where she outlined her plans to be the true mother of the groom, and he replied with, "Let's just keep the peace." Messages where he promised, again and again, to handle me. He had never been on my team. He had been the corrupt referee, secretly working for the other side, all in the name of avoiding a fight. For the next 2 hours, I worked with methodical precision. I took screenshots of everything. I arranged them in chronological order. I emailed them to a new, secret email address I created on the spot. I was building a case. I was assembling a weapon. Then, I opened a new document. My fingers flew across the virtual keyboard. I started with the birthday dinner. I detailed every conversation, every lie, every placating, cowardly text message. I wrote about Karen's attack, and the terror in my daughter's voice, and I wrote about the final, unforgivable betrayal, his admission that my safety and my dignity were less important than his desire to avoid a scene. When I was done, the first rays of dawn were painting the sky. I read it over one last time. It was a declaration of independence. It was a closing argument. It was the truth. I logged into my Facebook account. A page filled with 20 years of happy family photos that now looked like props from a fictional play. I wrote a new post. Attached the screenshots as exhibits A, B, and C, and tagged Lester, and all our mutual friends and family. My finger hovered over the post button. My heart wasn't pounding. My breath wasn't shallow. I felt a profound, unnerving calm. I knew that with one click, I was dropping a nuclear bomb on the life I had so carefully built. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that it was the only way to finally clear the radioactive fallout and breathe again. My finger hovered over the blue post button, a small, glowing portal to a future I couldn't yet see. For a single, suspended moment, the weight of 20 years pressed down on me, the laughter, the shared secrets, the feel of his hand in mine on 1,000 evening walks. It all felt impossibly heavy. But then, I saw my daughter's terrified face. I heard Karen's venomous screams echoing in my memory. And I felt the profound, chilling emptiness of my husband's betrayal. The weight vanished, replaced by a crystalline, unbreakable resolve. I wasn't destroying a life. I was cauterizing a wound. I took a steadying breath and tapped the screen. The confirmation was instantaneous and anticlimactic. The post was live. I didn't wait to see the first comment or the first like. With deliberate, methodical movements, I went into my phone's settings and turned off all notifications for every social media app. Then I put the phone face down on the kitchen counter. The silence in the house was absolute, the calm before a storm of my own making. I walked to the sink, filled the kettle with water, and set about the simple, mundane task of making myself a cup of tea. Each small action, the click of the stove's igniter, the clink of the mug on the counter, felt grounding, an anchor in the reality I had just irrevocably altered. It didn't take long. Within 10 minutes, the phone began to vibrate against the granite countertop. It was a low, persistent buzz, like an angry insect trapped under glass. It didn't stop. It just buzzed and buzzed. Affrontique. Desperate signal from a world I had just set on fire. I ignored it. I stirred a spoonful of honey into my tea and sat at the kitchen table, watching the sun begin to paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and orange. I felt strangely, unnervingly peaceful. The first direct intrusion came via a text message that flashed on my laptop screen, which was still open on the table. It was from my sister, Sarah. It just said, "Oh my God. Chris, I'm on my way. Don't answer your phone." A few minutes later, another one. This time a group text from Charlie. "Mom, we saw it. We're with you. All of us." The all of us was a balm to my soul. I closed the laptop. I had my children. That was the only thing that mattered. Lester. I found out later. was blissfully unaware for the first 2 hours of his workday. He was in a marketing meeting when his own phone began to vibrate incessantly in his pocket. He ignored it, annoyed, until his junior colleague, a young woman named Megan, slid her own phone across the conference table to him, her face pale with horror. On the screen was my post. I can only imagine that moment, the blood draining from his face, the incomprehensible words and damning screenshots resolving into a nightmare made real. All under the fluorescent lights of a corporate conference room. Surrounded by his peers. He arrived home just before 10 a.m. I heard his car skid to a halt in the driveway. The sound of the car door slamming echoing on our quiet street. He burst through the front door. His face ashen. His tie askew. He looked like a man who had just seen a ghost. He found me in the living room, calmly folding a basket of laundry. The sight of my domestic tranquility seemed to unhinge him. "Christina," he breathed, his voice a ragged whisper. He held his phone up, his hand shaking. "What have you done? What in God's name have you done?" I paused, carefully folding one of Ellie's sweatshirts, and looked up at him. I felt no fear, no anger, only a vast, weary pity. I told the truth. "Lester," I said simply. "You have to take it down," he said, his voice rising with panic. "Right now, before anyone else sees it. We can say you were hacked. We can fix this." I stood up, the folded sweatshirt held to my chest like a shield. I walked a few steps closer to him, close enough to see the frantic, desperate denial in his eyes. He still didn't get it. He still thought this was a problem to be managed. "There's nothing to fix, Lester," I said, my voice as calm and steady as my hands had been when I'd hit post. "I didn't break our marriage. It was already broken. I just held up a mirror so you could finally see it." "You've destroyed me," he whispered, the words collapsing under the weight of his dawning comprehension. "My career, my friends, my family." "No," I said, and the finality in my own voice surprised me. "You destroyed yourself. You did it over months of quiet, cowardly choices. You did it every time you chose her feelings over mine. You did it every time you chose your own comfort over the safety of your family. This isn't an execution, Lester. This is a consequence." He took a step towards me, his hands outstretched in a pleading gesture. But at that exact moment, the front door opened again. It was Charlie and David. They had come home from campus as soon as they saw the post. They took in the scene in an instant, me standing resolute, him crumbling and without a word. They moved to stand slightly in front of me. A solid, unbreachable wall of their own. "You need to leave, Dad," Charlie said, his voice low and hard, stripped of all its youthful warmth. "Now." Lester looked at his sons, his own flesh and blood, standing as my protectors, and something inside him seemed to finally break. The panic gave way to a raw, ugly despair. He stared at me, his face a ruin of disbelief and self-pity. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the house. I watched through the window as he got into his car and just sat there for a long time, his head bowed over the steering wheel. A broken king in the ruins of a kingdom he had abdicated long ago. The next morning, while Lester was likely attempting to salvage his professional reputation, a process server walked into the lobby of his downtown office building and handed him a sealed envelope. Inside were the divorce papers. I had instructed my lawyer to file them the moment my post went live. There would be no negotiations, no tearful reunions, no second chances. I was done. The days that followed were a blur of support. My sister arrived with 2 tubs of ice cream and a bottle of wine and just sat with me while I talked. My friends rallied, creating a protective circle that deflected the inevitable flying monkeys and gossip mongers. But the most important healing happened one evening. A week after it all went down, Adam and Alice had asked if they and Ben could come over. I agreed without hesitation. The 5 of them, Adam, Alice, Ben, Charlie, and David, all sat with me and Ellie in the living room. It was Adam who spoke first, his voice thick with an emotion that went far beyond the guilt he'd shown before. "Christina," he began, looking me straight in the eye. "I have spent the last week thinking about how I failed you. I was a coward. I was so scared of my biological mother that I was willing to sacrifice you, and I will live with that shame for the rest of my life." He took a deep breath. "But what you did for this family, you did what my father should have done all along. You stood up to the bully. You protected us. You protected Ellie. You're the strongest person I know. And you are my mom. You always have been, and you always will be." Tears streamed down my face. But for the first time, they weren't tears of pain or betrayal. They were tears of release. Ben, always the quiet one, reached out and squeezed my hand. "Always," he said softly. In that moment, surrounded by my children, all of them, I knew I had made the right choice. My marriage was gone. But my family, my real family, was stronger than ever. A few months have passed since that day. The divorce was surprisingly swift. Lester, stripped of his public facade and abandoned by many of his fair-weather friends, didn't fight. He just signed the papers. I have my own place now. A bright, airy apartment that Ellie and I have filled with plants and laughter. It's smaller than the house, but it feels infinitely larger. Unburdened by the weight of secrets and lies. I used to think that love was about silent sacrifice, about absorbing pain to keep the peace. I learned the hard way that true love requires respect. And respect requires boundaries. Lester didn't choose me. He chose the ease of his silence. In the end, that's all. He was left with an empty elaborablis h eptinome empty. Quiet house. As for me, I got my voice back. I got my children. I got my self-respect. And most importantly, I got myself back. I'm sitting on my new balcony now. A cup of coffee warming my hands as I watch the sunset. The air is cool and clean. Life isn't a perfect, curated picture anymore. It's messy and real and sometimes difficult. But it's mine. The peace isn't forced, it's earned. My phone buzzes on the small table beside me. It's a picture message from Charlie. A goofy selfie of him and David at a football game. I smile. A real, uncomplicated smile that reaches all the way to my eyes. I type back a quick reply. My heart full and, for the first time in a very long time, completely whole.